All right, good morning. It is Monday, July 12th at 9:30 a.m. and this is the meeting of the Planning, Housing, and Economic Development Committee. And we are taking up this morning a review of county economic development grant programs and tax credits targeting a specific sector, which is very broadly at the moment the biotechnology, life sciences sector. Where this is part of a larger review. Thanks to Councilmember Friedson for requesting a review of all these programs. And we're taking them up one step at a time. The SBIR discussion, I think, will take up a good amount of today's discussion. We're joined by Councilmember Glass, who introduced legislation addressing some aspects of the SBIR program. And we have a great collection of experts on the call with us today, or on the Zoom with us today. So we'll ask everybody to go ahead. If you're here for this, please, you can turn your camera on. And I want to start off just by saying that reformulating the SBIR program, which I think is one of our signature incentives, it's a terrific targeted program. And I think it has a good impact, but it could be better. And reformulating it has been on my list for several years now. The pandemic really did kind of sweep aside a lot of this nuts and bolts work, but and then particularly because a lot of that was planned to take place during the budget process, and we ended up having a very abbreviated budget process. So this conversation, I would say actually really was initially intended for March of 2020. So we're here now for the summer session to focus on it. And it's been a big part of conversations that I've had with Rich Bendis and Brad Stewart and the team at MCEDC, how to target our funding best. Within the continuum of grants and assistance for companies that might be targeting the SBIR program. And so I know Rich is on the Zoom today, and Sarah Miller. Welcome to BHI, Sarah. I'm glad you're there. And we'll hear from everybody about their thinking on how we can improve this. And I see we're joined by Phil Singerman from MCEDC. Terrific. Phil is a national expert on federal programs working with MCEDC, and Christy Blake is here. I'm sure there'll be others. We'll introduce everybody as we proceed. So Jean has prepared a packet. Today's discussion, again, focuses on first the SBIR STTR program, secondly, the biotechnology investor tax credit, as we proceed in the dialogue, I will try to manage this with if you want to get in, you might just signal me. There's a lot of us here, but I think it can be okay. My colleagues certainly text me to ensure that you're in the queue. I don't know if anyone wanted to make any prefatory comments. Certainly would welcome that. Good morning, Ben. And Judy Costello has moved from BHI to the county executive team. Good morning, Judy, and Jerome Fletcher. And I see we're joined by finance and lots of folks. So Jean, why don't you tell us what give us a quick overview, introduce, make sure everyone's introduced, and then we'll proceed in the packet. And then, from my perspective, I think we need some recommendations for change. And so I'm an invitation here to those here to tell us their best thinking about how we could reformulate this program and make some improvements. So, Jean, why don't you go ahead and start us off?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Reamer, and good morning to the committee and all of our participants. As you shared, the committee requested at the behest of Mr. Friedson to review all of the Economic Development Fund programs in fiscal 22, and so we're going to start with these two. I'm appreciative of all of the assistance from our executive team as well as MCDC and BHI on this one. Any information that was provided when the packet was printed, we've provided now, but we can always provide supplements later as information comes out. I'm also joined by Ms. Acevedo, who's one of our council fellows this summer. She partnered with me on the SBIR matching grant program, and so we're going to tag team on that one in this presentation. And then I did the second one mostly, and we'll get to that one later. And as Mr. Reamer said, feel free to interrupt me if we have questions. Ms. Acevedo and I will try to work through the background as quickly as possible and then get to the discussion. The primary kind of purpose of this is to have open discussion, but council staff acknowledges that there's a lot of information that could be contained in each of these programs, and so we've just tried to tee up discussion points, and certainly as the committee discusses or request information, we can always come back with additional details. I'll just also highlight again that there is no specific recommendations or changes before the committee today, so the discussion is what's going to lead that in the future if anything is going to change or alter based on the committee's discussion. So real quickly, all jurisdictions across the country provide business incentives of a variety of sorts. They are either financial or non-financial incentives. And financial incentives can typically take what's called discretionary view, where the jurisdiction takes discretion on how much based on the value added from the economic development project. And then there are entitlement programs, and the two that we're going to look at today are entitled programs, where the incentive is built in through either a formula or technocratically. The county provides most of its financial incentives through the Economic Development Fund, and as you can see on Table 1, pages 2 and 3, we've had 16 of them through the Economic Development Fund, but about half of them are currently defunct, primarily because they were one-time programs that served a very niche purpose. But certainly, as they're always reported in the Economic Fund annual report, they're programs that the county did fund at some point in time to induce business growth or economic development. Council staff, as we go through this review throughout fiscal 22, has tried to create a similar structure for all reviews so that we can get the flavor, but certainly is welcomes comments from the committee as we go through this to either enhance or remove things that are of less value as we go through this process. But on Circle 24, I share a little bit of how we'll go through each of these programs as they're scheduled, so that again, we can have a similar feel and review for each of them. So with that, I'll go ahead and move on to the SBIR STTR matching grant program. I'll just call it the county's matching grant program so we can cut some of the acronyms out for the rest of the morning, since that'll be a mouthful. What I will say real quickly is this program was created in fiscal 19 to provide small grants to businesses that were awarded either an SBIR STTR Phase 1 or Phase 2 grant from the National Institutes of Health. They were small grants for Phase 1 up to $25,000 or 25% of the grant they received, and for Phase 2 grants up to $75,000 or 25% of the Phase 2 grant that they were awarded from NIH. As Mr. Reamer noted, through legislation sponsored by himself and Mr. Glass, the council expanded this program to include more awards than just the National Institutes of Health, and fiscal 22 will be the first year that expanded eligibility will take effect. And so we will continue to monitor the program, at least in to see how many new businesses qualify and apply under the expanded eligibility. Each program will have, at least in the written document, the basics for the administration of the program. I'm not going to go through that in great detail. We are joined by finance and executive staff who can answer specific questions related to the program's administration if committee members have questions. What I'll say is that due to the law, the program is administered on a first come, first served basis. So there is an application that finance receives, and there's a timestamp to be able to determine who is first come, first served. More importantly, the other item that is placed in the legislation is that the appropriation is split 50-50 each year between Phase 1 and Phase 2 grants. This is to ensure that both awardees on Phase 1 and Phase 2 have equal competition, so that one phase doesn't use up the entire appropriation. And so we'll talk more about that later when we get to the discussion item, because there appears to be some nuance there in terms of how much is being used for both phases that may be able to leverage the resources the council's putting in each year. On page, excuse me, page 5 on tables 2 and 3, we have the information for the historical data that the county has for this program by fiscal year. On average, about 10 businesses receive grants a year. Only 3 businesses can receive grants under the phase 2 because on average, the maximum $75,000 goes out. And as I noted earlier, the 50-50 split leaves about 3 businesses a year that can receive that grant. But more importantly, on table 3, we can see the total universe, at least from SBIR.gov, of the SBIR, STTR phase 1 and phase 2 grants in the county. And over the last 5 years, more than $373 million, or almost $373 million of grants through the federal government for this technology transfer grants have come into the county from almost 730 businesses. And so the county's matching grant program, a very important program to continue to bolster those businesses, is obviously just a small fraction of the universe of the federal government's program in this county alone, as well as in the nation. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Mrs. Saviato, who's going to share some about the other states that have this program and the information she researched during this time. So thank you.
Good morning to the committee and to everyone. So with respect to how the county's matching grant program compares to programs in other jurisdictions, phase 1 and 2 matching grant programs exist in at least 22 states, and phase 0 grants are provided in at least 21 states. Attached to the staff report is the Small Business Administration's 2020 list of states that provide matching grants for SBIR, STTR phase 1 or 2, or phase 0 awards. This list starts on circle page 28. And these programs on the list are statewide programs. Maryland does not have a statewide program. The county's matching grant program is one of 2 local programs that are available. The maximum awards for phase 1 and 2 vary across states between $25,000 to $150,000 for phase 1 and $50,000. Yes.
Just a question.
Sure.
Montgomery County is one of 2 local programs in the country. Can you tell us the other one?
The other one is, let's see here.
Charlottesville, Virginia, I think.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Thanks to BHI for that fine for us.
Keep going, Ms. Acevedo.
Thank you. All right, so as mentioned, the maximum awards for phase 1 and 2 vary across states, and for phase 2, it's between $50,000 to $200,000. Phase 0 awards often range from $1,500 to $5,000. So on table 4, located on page 6, it provides a snapshot of matching grant programs in selected states as compared to the county's program. The number of awardees in the county per fiscal year are comparable to the number of awardees in other state programs. The county has provided grants to an average of 10 businesses per year in the last 3 fiscal years. The total awards to county businesses are comparable to award amounts in many of the state programs reviewed. Most states focus their awards on phase 1 grants over phase 2 grants. Some states require businesses to provide semi-regular updates about how the matching grant is allowing the business to succeed. So for example, New Mexico SBIR grant awardees submit 3-month reports to New Mexico's Economic Development Department. And the awardees report on new investments in facilities, products, employees, or other areas made as a result of receiving the matching grant. Another example, the Hawaii Technology Department Corporation reports the number of new full-time employees over 5 years and the number of jobs saved over 5 years. And finally, another kind of point to, or another important thing to note would be that the New Mexico SBIR STTR support program collects gender ethnic, and racial data on the principal investigators for the underlying federal SBIR, STTR awards.
Great, thank you. All right, I'd like to turn to our partners here. I'm going to start with Rich, but then we'll go to Ben. Rich, we've been talking about reformulating this program for some time, and in fact, getting your guidance on how to do that was part of our strategy for, bringing the county back into partnership with BHI, which it had fallen out of. And, we're glad we're working strongly together, and you've been bringing a lot of value to the table, and your strategic advice here is really needed. And I'll say we started those conversations, I think, early in this council term, and since then we've got a terrific expanded team at MCEDC with Ben and Brad and others. So we'll hear from them as well. But why don't we get some high-level thoughts from you, Rich, and Sarah Miller as well, as to what you think we ought to be thinking about here.
Thank you, council member. Basically, the SBIR program is really, as it's looked upon nationally, is one of the best early stage seed funding programs that exist in the United States and in the world, actually. The federal SBIR program. So, there's basically any agency or federal agency that has over $100 million annual budget is required to have a set aside for small businesses to apply on a competitive basis for early stage research grants, generally high risk. And as you know, the ones we have been focused on have been at the National Institute of Health. And that fund is about $1.2 billion annually of SBIR grants available. With all of the agencies, it's about $4 billion, DOD being the highest, and then NIH and NSF and some of the other agencies. So, and because of the emphasis in life sciences in Montgomery County, I think it's been geared towards life sciences, which has been appropriate because that's generally where a lot of our growth has been coming, or the early stage companies growing. So I think the matching program is a good program to have. And bottom line is I view it as in two phases. One, it's more of a retention than an attraction program, because you're not going to get someone to move to Montgomery County for $25,000 or $5,000. There's only 2 states actually that utilize this for attraction. And you have Nebraska, maybe 3, Kentucky and Tennessee. And they will allocate up to $500,000 on a match for a phase 2 win. And they have been specifically utilizing that as a matching program to help attract companies to their states. The other states that do this basically do it as a matching grant program to reward those companies in their states who are doing a good job and are recognized by the federal agencies for the quality of the research they're doing. So, number one, the amount of money available in the program in Montgomery County, I think, is important to people to use as a tool to say the county is committed to funding early stage companies, and specifically life science companies, especially when you combine that with the Maryland Biotechnology tax credit program. But I think it recognizes those companies that are doing a good job in winning federal grants that are recognized and have to go through generally a rigorous process for evaluation before they can receive their awards. The $25,000 is nice for a phase 1, and as you know, phase 1 awards can be anywhere from maybe $150,000 to $500,000 from the federal agency. A phase 2 award from the federal agencies or NIH can go up to $2 million. And sometimes if you get a contract, or they call them fast track awards, one of our companies in Montgomery County just got a $3.7 million phase 2 award for the National Institute for Neurological Disorders, and that's Miracule. So $3.7 million is very significant. And they would be eligible to apply for, Montgomery County matching of $75,000. What would $75,000 do? It might enable a company that's an early growth company to hire one person, which would be important for a small business. So I think this also is something that is great from a marketing perspective nationally. Montgomery County, until we found this little Charlottesville program, is the only local jurisdiction in the United States that has a biotechnology tax credit program or an SBIR matching grant program. So that sets us aside from every other local jurisdiction to say we recognize small business is important to our growth, and basically also that life sciences biohealth companies are extremely important to our ecosystem. So we feel it's a program that should be continued. The only comments I've had in the past have been really related to the manner in which companies are selected to receive a grant. And that means that it's first come, first serve. That doesn't necessarily mean the best small business that has the greatest opportunity for growth to add jobs is the one who would get the matching grant. It would be the ones who apply first to get the matching grant program. But it's difficult since they've already gone through a rigorous evaluation process by the federal agency or NIH. All of those companies have been deemed to be viable companies that are worthy of getting federal funding, which means traditionally that they should also be worthy of getting county funding, because they've already been evaluated by a rigorous selection process. So I'm not questioning that companies who have received grants from Montgomery County should not have received them. But if you have a limited pool of money of $500,000 a year or whatever it is, are we making certain that the companies who have the highest growth potential and the highest need may be the ones that would be the recipients of the grants? So when you package everything else together with the economic and development incentive programs, I think Montgomery County is very competitive. And as I said, I think this helps set aside or put the county in a national perspective that is very competitive based on the programs it's designed, especially for biohealth companies. And then, I'll stop there, but we haven't seen many companies around, or counties or cities in the United States develop their own individual programs. And it might be related to budgets or really the state incentives that are offered at the state level and not necessary to offer at the city or the county level. And Sarah, with all of the analysis we put together for what we provided to Jean, is there anything else you would like to add that I missed in my opening remarks?
Not right now. I just think, as the council goes through the whole information gathering of all of the incentives and kind of eventually what your goals are, we're happy to provide you more information. I would say to think, as Rich said, about who are the companies that would have this amount of money would have the most impact on. And I would also say you could take a look at some of the work that the federal government is doing in terms of entrepreneurs who are women and those of color. And I think that those are some goals also that everyone could work toward.
Well, that's intriguing. I'd love to have you expand on that a bit more. I'm going to turn to Councilmember Glass has asked for a question. He has to leave at 10:15. So before I turn to him, and we'll hear from MCEDC. I would like to ask MCEDC and BHI for any recommendations on how to change the program to the extent that you think that's necessary. Some of the areas that we had talked about was like a phase 1.5, you know, where the grantees in between their phase 1 and their phase 2 often are, you know, pretty thin in their ability to raise funds. And so there was some discussion about that. You know, we had talked about phase 0 and whether we ought to be putting something behind that, and whether our phase 2 was the best use of funding given the large size of phase 2 grants. Hear what you said, Rich, about every dollar is spent well. You know, whether, you know, so it's not that that money isn't valuable for the company. I think just the question being, is it the most valuable way for us to allocate our resources? So I think these are sort of the open questions of the program, and
Yeah.
we're all open, I think, to tinkering with this or redesigning it if that seems like that's what folks are going to recommend.
I forgot to mention one thing I think is important for people to understand is that if you win a federal grant, you don't get the money up front.
Right.
You basically have submitted a proposal that says you're going to do a number of activities. As you complete those activities, you submit your reports and get reimbursed, or you get your funding based on the achievement of the milestones in the grant that you've been awarded. So just because you might have won $500,000 or $2 million, that doesn't alleviate a lot of cash flow problems for early stage companies. And one of the things that I think is good about the county program is that the county provides the money at one time, and it can be used as a bridge. And, you know, to be honest with you, if you won a phase 1 grant that was $200,000 and you're going to win a phase 2 grant, and generally you have a much better chance of winning a phase 2 if you've already run a phase 1. Generally, the agency will ask you to submit sometimes if they really like what you're doing. But there's a bridging period between that time you won your phase 1 and you get that money, you apply for a phase 2, you win, and then before you get your award, it could be several months. So if you win and you get your letter from the agency saying that you've won, you know, $75,000 for Montgomery County is a very nice amount of money to help bridge a small business as they're going through that process from a phase 1 to a phase 2. And I forgot to mention that, but I think that's another advantage of the way our program is designed now, which is a good element of the program, which does help provide some funding that's needed for these small businesses as they're going through the grant application process or trying to raise money from angels or whatever they might be doing, or getting money from TEDCO. So I think that is a good element of the program.
Great. Okay, so before we turn to MCEDC, I'll invite Councilmember Glass to direct a question. He said he wanted to direct one to you, Mr. Bendis, and then we'll keep going.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good to see everybody. Before I was introducing the Oversight and Small Business Investment Act, which has been referenced, expanded the eligibility for the matching programs beyond just NIH. We had a roundtable at the council office building. Councilmember Reamer was there, me, some of you were there, and the reason I bring that up, it was the last in-person meeting, right? And so I'm glad we're now having this conversation. I know this was planned back then, and the world has changed. I think showing how important these programs are and how important the pioneering and life-saving work, the research that's being done here in Montgomery County is with regard to the pandemic and global health in general. Mr. Bendis, I appreciate the way you framed this work, right? The matching grant program, and thought it was, I hadn't thought of it this way, but the way you said that these types of programs are actually retention programs, right? I think that's actually right. That might not be the intention of some when we talk about it or the importance of it, but we know we have the smartest minds here already doing incredible work in private sector and in federal agencies, and this will keep them, these programs will keep them here. And so the question I wanted to ask has really been already asked by the chair, and that is how we can continue making these programs better, because as both of you have identified, the hiccup, as I see it, and as you do too, is that it's a first come, first served basis. and whether or not there's another type of evaluation tool to look at return on investment or growth potential or some other system. Don't know if that is the right way to do it, but clearly there is so much demand and so many bright minds who on the face of it are eligible for this. I think there is room to improve. And so I will just stop there and listen into the rest of this conversation. And as we try to refine this and make it better so that more people and more businesses can stay here and we can retain them here in Montgomery County. So thank you all for this work.
Thank you. Glad you're here. Okay, Ben and your team.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would also just add to Councilman Glass's point that not only is this a retention opportunity, but also a potential attraction opportunity too. Being able to have this county program, which is one of the first of its kind, with a potential match with the federal, also may, because of the proximity of the federal assets that we have, may allow people to also consider to locate in Montgomery County as well. And the hope is that we can continue to encourage the General Assembly to pass Delegate Xi's opportunity to expand the SBIR matching program to the state level as well. And then we could really have this triumvirate between the federal, state, and county that can serve as a powerful magnet for attraction and retention for our business development efforts. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the members of the FED committee for holding this hearing. I'm joined by Christy Blake, as well as Phil Stingerman, who is out of state, and also Brad Stewart. So Christy and Brad and Phil have a couple of points they wanted to make, and I'll first open it up to Brad to give a perspective from a CEO, as well as from the business development team, what they're hearing on the ground about companies that are engaged with SBIR or seeking SBIR support. Brad, you're still muted.
Sorry, I was muted by the host. So thanks, Ben. And I'll start with a caveat that many of these remarks are from my own personal experience. But, I think both Rich and Sarah made some important points. And I thank Councilmember Glass for his last observation, because it goes back to the foundation of what I would say the next important step to think about would be. This is a strategic use of funds to help businesses grow here within the county, whether that's to attract them here, to retain them here. But what we want is for them to be successful here, employ people here, get bigger, and those sorts of things. And I think stopping the strategic part and making the money available is not where it should stop. The strategic part should be who could best deploy those funds and where does it provide the greatest return? Because the system we have now, which is first come, first serve, especially when there's such a tremendous number of people who potentially could receive those funds, I think is maybe a detriment to the opportunity we have in front of us. I don't think there's a simple system, an easy system to figure out how to most strategically determine who those people are. And I think it would have to be one that's done very light from a bureaucratic perspective, because as everyone's pointed out, one of the objectives is to get money to these people quickly, so that in many cases they need this money to bridge from a phase 1 to phase 2, or even get to being able to execute a phase 1. But I do think the opportunity in front of us really is to try and understand how to strategically, and I'll say it this way, I don't want it to be taken this way. I've gotten this feedback from other people who continue to use first in, first out sort of systems, and their response is then we don't want to pick winners and losers. They want to take the least risky approach to that money being allocated. And my point of view is different than that. There is an opportunity to help enable those who are going to create the greatest amount of success for everyone around them.
Yeah, well, I think we'd love to know how to build that kind of program. So, I presume as a follow-up from this, we can ask you to spend some time and design that. Christy, did you want to add some comments? And then Councilmember Joando has a question.
Sure, yeah, thank you. So one of the things that Phil and I worked on when we were preparing for this meeting is to take a look at the SBIR programs that are available in the county, similar to what was in the packet, and do an assessment of how the county and the state fare with regard to not only the successes of our companies with SBIRs, but also how the programs work, how our local programs work to support companies. And I think some of the recommendations that we came up with maybe aren't specific to any sort of programmatic change, but I believe it would be beneficial for us to convene the local programs on a more regular basis to improve some coordination and knowledge sharing, and that might give us some better insight on the specific successes of the programs, and maybe even to narrow the focus a little bit more to see how we want to create the most impact for the programs that we're providing for the companies. Brad said that he's gotten some feedback from folks within the private industry on determining the needs for how these programs can be impactful. And I think, that's, again, worth more exploration. And that will help us to identify some refinements to specifically address the existing programs and maybe even create some additional metrics for future assessments of program success. And I think all of that will help pull together opportunities for us to advocate and seek some more federal funding to support some of these programs.
Okay. Phil. The host has everybody muted.
Yeah, here we go. So under Ben's direction, we prepared a detailed national comparison and assessment of the programs that operate in the county that we're finalizing and will be shared when that's reviewed. But I can provide some highlights. First, I want to associate myself with all the comments, Rich's comments and Brad's comments, and particularly Ben, describing the potential for the county to be recognized as a national leader in innovation through smart strategic investments in this particular program. So just a couple of highlights. The state ranks in the top 5 among all states in the number of SBIR awards. California's first, Massachusetts, and then we're slightly behind Virginia, and then there's us, and then we're followed by Colorado. So approximately 300 proposal awards a year in the state, and we in Montgomery County companies get about half of those. We did a detailed analysis breaking down Montgomery County awards by agency, which shows where we're strong and where we might be able to perform better. And this is also reflected in a separate analysis that was performed by the State Science and Technology Institute, which looked at SBIR performance on a relative basis per 1,000 innovation companies. And when it's looked at in that regard, the county slips from the top 5 to somewhere in the bottom of the top 10. And so that suggests that there is an opportunity to do better if it's selectively targeted. There are 3 programs currently operating in the county. So there's the county program that has been subject to discussion. There's the BHI assistance program. On the county program, Lori and her team are doing a fabulous job running the program. And just as everyone else has said, I think there's a question about the first come, first served model that bears some examination. You might decide you want to keep it, but I think there are our analysis of other state programs is that almost all of them use a selective mechanism to identify first-time winners, women and minority, as Sarah pointed out, underrepresented firms, women and minority-owned. And so that might be something that the county would want to do. Or those firms that have the best potential for commercialization, point that Rich made. There's a concept, I think some of you know, SBIR mills. So these are companies whose business model is winning SBIR programs and getting grants, and their commercialization rate is very low. They're eligible for the program, but it's not clear that they would be one of the goals of the program to continue to fund them. When I was at NIST, we reformed under my direction, we reformed the SBIR program to eliminate, in effect, eliminate the ability of SBIR mills to win to win awards. So that's the county's program. BHI does a very good job in providing very detailed assistance to individual companies. TEDCO has a program that's funded by the SBA, the Federal and State Technology Partnership, the FAST program, which focuses on NSF grant applications and focuses on underserved communities, rural and distressed communities, and women and minorities. We're a partner with them, and we help to identify women and minority-owned firms. They have a different technical assistance model than Rich's, which is one-on-one. They do it in cohorts through a curriculum. About 20 to 25 companies a year. About a third of those are Montgomery County companies, and so there's an opportunity there to work more closely. And then there's the state program, which is authorized by not funded. So I want to close by echoing Christie's comment. We think that there's an opportunity to do a deeper dive into the data and into the national models that could illuminate that would identify best practices and could illuminate what might be opportunities for the county to optimize all of these programs. We'd be glad to take the lead in that. We're kind of neutral because we don't run any of the programs, so we don't have a horse in that race. And we would do that in collaboration with BHI, with Lori and the county team, and with TEDCO and with the state.
Excellent. Just what I was hoping to hear. Thank you so much. So we'll talk about a timeline, but great. Councilmember Joando.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And appreciate the conversation by everybody. It's a very important one. It's been mentioned a couple times about women-owned businesses and businesses of color and how we, can make sure that they're getting access to these funds. And it's just, we're having an overall conversation about how best to modify potentially and better utilize and leverage these dollars in the SBIR program. I guess the question would, for whoever wants to answer it, I know that this has been an issue. If you look at venture capital just in general, women-owned businesses have improved over the last 15 years a little bit. Businesses of color, very low numbers in traditional venture capital markets. And SBIR, while a little better, I know the federal number is a little more. So I guess my question will be first, what do we know? Phil, you kind of were getting into this. What is the percentage of women and businesses of color that are accessing grants now? It's about 8% for businesses of color, for example, and nationally. What's our number here? And have we considered having what would you all think about having a goal or some sort of, metric? One, do we know what we're doing? And to try to reach a higher number, because, we certainly are missing innovators and people with ideas if we're not reaching the full breadth of our community, particularly a community like Montgomery County, where we're majority people of color, right? And so can someone speak to what the current status is of the awards that we've given out, but then also the thought about if we tried to set a higher goal or a percentage or some sort of metric that would push us to do better.
I can touch on that briefly if you'd like.
Sure.
So utilizing the SBIR website, you can look up, you're probably familiar with this obviously, but look up the awards within the state and then also within the county, and they separate those out by women-owned firms and then also by socially and economically disadvantaged firms. And I did a quick analysis recently just of the region, so I didn't separate it out by the county, but it'd be relatively easy to do, and I could get you the number by the end of the day. But SBIR and STTR awards in the region, meaning the District, Maryland, and Virginia. A total of 3% of all of those awards within 2016 to 2020 were women-owned and socially and economically disadvantaged firms.
3%.
3%
For both.
For both, yeah.
That's horrible. That's a
Right.
horrible number.
It's 3% for a female who is also,
Okay.
right.
Well, okay.
Yeah,
I
and
hope
then-
that. Yeah. That's still not
which
great.
is still
but yeah,
terrible. It's
yeah,
terrible,
yeah.
right? Like, I mean, the point, yeah, of course, female scientists are everywhere. We just don't know where they are. But Chrissy, you have a couple other, I don't mean to jump in, but you actually gave these. You were sharing them with us. You have a couple more?
I did, yeah. So not women-owned, but socially and economically disadvantaged firms within the region, DC, Maryland, and Virginia, were a total of 7% of all the awards. And then, let's see, I'm trying to find the other one. Women-owned firms, but not socially and economically disadvantaged firms in the region were a total of 16% of all total awards. So
Got
it's
it.
still relatively low numbers, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's what I suspect, and I'd love to see that. I think if that I don't
Absolutely,
if that,
yeah.
you guys could send that, but that's pretty like Montgomery County because of who we are. That's pretty comparable to national numbers as far as and so obviously not where we want to be in a nationally, but also locally, and so I guess to the second point, one of the things since this is the good group to have, one of the things I've asked our Office of Legislative Oversight to do is to work with either a vendor and or with their current staff to get a really good assessment of who are the businesses that are here and what are the demographics and breakdowns of who they are and what they do. We really don't have, I haven't seen a really, we have a general sense, but we don't have as specific a sense as we need to if we're going to address disparities, for example, particularly coming out of what we've come out of with COVID, both the negative parts of it and businesses that have been hurt, but also the opportunity for people to get back in the game and have innovation and try to start new things and grow the economy. So I'll just say that I think getting a better understanding will be helpful. But what about the idea, and are you all aware of, or what do you think about the idea of having, really putting, we talked about this first in, first out, which also could disadvantage that interplays with these groups. We've seen with our programs that we put out just for assistance, the people who are most connected, most know how to access, and for that reason, we've tried to do lotteries and do other things to mitigate that issue. So in this program, could we do some sort of, target goal for these companies and put some money aside for that? And is that done in other places? And what do you all think about that? And I don't know, Phil, if maybe I'll direct it to you to start, but anyone else that wants to chime in.
So to the question of first come, first serve. So I'll say two things. First of all, we want to look more carefully. We have some notions. We want to look more carefully with the team. My personal, Brad offered some personal comments. I think if your goals are to increase the number of underserved companies in the program or targeted companies or first-time companies, a first-time, first-serve incentive is not very powerful, is not useful. And if you want to, as Brad pointed out, advance commercialization of pre-qualified companies, and others have mentioned this, companies that have gone through, Rich mentioned it, the peer review of the federal agencies, first come, first serve is not the way to do it. And as we mentioned, virtually every other state has a selective process. And the federal agencies have a selective process, right? That's how they determine who. It's not first come, first served NSF. I served on a peer review earlier this spring for NSF's medical device. Very, very rigorous. So those depends upon your goals, right?
Right.
Because the way the program is now operating is a function of the way it was designed. And so if you design it differently, you're going to get a different set of goals. So But I think there probably are other things that you would want to look at as you looked at this examination, and the method of selecting companies is just one of those.
Sure, sure.
And I'll add, Councilmember Joando, if I can. I think your idea is an appropriate discussion point. I think it is an opportunity to consider whether this is an opportunity to better support those businesses, whether they're businesses of color or led by women. And I think the important thing is to say it's an opportunity to better support them, because I think if you really want to do that, it's not just how you have a selection process, which makes it a level playing field at a minimum for them, but also how do you connect them with other tools and resources that increase the likelihood they're going to succeed, you know, to move down the pipeline towards commercialization, to have a better opportunity to raise capital, if they're raising venture funds or whatever it might be. So I think it's really an opportunity to think about how to connect not just the right people to this program, but then to connect those right people to the right resources to make sure they're successful.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and certainly there's several barriers we got to deal with them, and opportunities to assist. I think you're right. I mean, and certainly one of them is how we structure our program, realizing it's a small amount of funds, and it's connected to other funding. But, you know, I will say the SBIR numbers nationally and locally, as we just are better than traditional ventures. So we certainly in this instance want to be doing all we can to lift up those communities. Also because, you know, we're just missing out. I mean, you know, there's so many people here that have great ideas. It's not just the right thing to do or the equitable thing to do. It's just economically the right thing to do too, to make sure that everyone has the right tools. You get more innovation that helps everybody, you know. And so, all right, well, I'd like to look into that more and get more specific ideas and work with you all about how we might, and I know this is the goal today, but either change how we administer the program. Sounds like there's some consensus building around moving on from first come, first serve in some way, but also, you know, again, I'll put this idea about the goal on on the table too. I think I'd like to see here and have you all look into that a little more too, particularly for our women-owned and businesses of color. And so if you could, you know, we can follow up on that, but I think that'd be something, Mr. Chairman, that warrants some further discussion.
Definitely. I think these are the kinds of issues we were hoping to bring to light today. By moving towards a system that is no longer first come, first serve, there are possibilities that open up. And it seems like one of the things we could do, I don't know if it's a goal or if it's just setting aside a certain amount of money that is for those applicants. You know, we may be able to do that. I think we'll want to think about expanding the amount of resources that we invest in the program. You know, a lot of questions have come up that, you know, just merit some further digging. Like, if you're going to make it an attraction program, we heard that one state offers $500,000 as the match, you know, which is enough for a company maybe to consider a location, whereas we offer, you know, $50,000 or $75,000 or something like that. So, you know, there are multiple opportunities here we are diving into about improvements that we can make, and the learning that there, of course, SBR is classified according to the status of the applicant, and then that could provide us with a vehicle to further target our resources is really good news.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just follow on to Councilman Joando's question about whether or not, as we revisit these issues, whether or not we should look at target goals. And Councilman, you know, MCDC, we share your goals and your desires, and we want to be as much of an advocate for an inclusive economy and to make sure that all possible participants in our recovery economy can be done. I do want to, though, raise a potential concern about a target goal for minority-owned businesses, women and minority-owned businesses, because if we're going to move aside from an objective first come, first serve, and then we're shifting towards an outcome-based program to provide jobs, we may not want to make the process harder than at least from on the job perspective. I mean, to be able to prioritize that. Certainly, I think, though, we do want to rise the numbers and outreach, programmatic support that we can provide either through MCDC, BHI, or any other entities, I think should be a priority. And for MCDC, I think you can commit to us as trying to further that goal. But as the council is looking to revise the program, having a target goal may not be the most impactful way to be able to drive what the final outcome will be, and that is how many jobs are created, whether or not SBIR companies in Montgomery County can move effectively from phase 1 to phase 2 and continue to grow and expand.
Well,
Yeah, if I could just, Mr. Chairman, just briefly, appreciate that, Mr. Wu. I do think that, this is certainly a good conversation. I will say, when you have a county like ours, highly educated county, that's highly diverse, the majority of our population, again, are people of color. I don't think we're in any danger of adding more money or setting a goal. I think the companies are here, the people are here, the ideas are here. I think there's just historical and institutional barriers that have gotten in the way of that. And so, I understand the concern, but I think it should be on the table. One of the things I wanted to mention too is that I was aware, I think might have been Tennessee or somebody, but some state that I read a couple of weeks ago had a program where for their SBIR dollars, they had a higher match if you were a disadvantaged or a business of color. Like they gave you more money. That's another potential strategy to deal with some of the access to capital. So it's not one solution, but I think we have to push ourselves to think of other things. But this being a big part of it.
absolutely. And I'll just add to that, we could have first come, first serve for a pot of money that's for women and businesses of color. And then we could have a separate track for, a pool where we are sorting according to different criteria. I mean, there's lots of ways that we could do it that might be administratively simple and yet help achieve the goal. I see a lot of hands here, but Councilmember Friedson wants to join the conversation, so I'll turn it to him.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think before we get too far down the rabbit hole of what we can and can't do, we should have a lawyer, explain to us what we are allowed to do, what we aren't allowed to do, and because there are certain things that we would like to do that we can't do, and so I just think that that might be helpful for the follow-up of this conversation to actually talk through this. I mean, the county hasn't done a disparity study in way too long. I know we're hopeful that we can move that forward, but there are certain challenges, some of which, frankly, we all don't like, that we're required to go through some hoops and such to make the case for, basically scientific confirmation of what we already know. But, I do think it's helpful before we, start crafting things that we could and can't do, that we understand what the framework is. But, I share that goal. I think the tiered match or some type of, rubric where it's, it's not outcomes based, because that's not this type of program. If we're going to move forward and continue this program, it has to be, if you check this box, you get this. If you check this box, you get that. I mean, that is really, it's a formulaic process, and that is for both the applicants, and for the county administration of it. If we go beyond that, it changes the nature of this program. And I saw Lori's hand being raised, and I'm sure she's going to raise the administrative challenges as the person who actually knows the work that goes into these types of programs. And so I'm sympathetic to that issue, but I think that we all share the same goal. I do, related to this, I am a little interested in how this program works in general, and what our goal is and how we achieve that goal. I think it's great to double down on our core assets. I'm all for that, and obviously this is an area that we do really well. I do think it is somewhat interesting that there's only one other jurisdiction that does this, Charlottesville, Virginia. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's not a good thing that only one other local jurisdiction is doing it. But I'd be interested to think through and learn what we think that might mean. Why is that? Why aren't other jurisdictions doing this? Are we just competing with states because we have that strong of a biohealth, biotech industry. I see Mr. Bendis wants to weigh in on that. So maybe you could start with that, and then I have a couple other follow-up questions. But why do you think that is? If this is a successful program, seemingly we're doing well with it, why aren't other jurisdictions like us doing it?
Number one, if you have 22 states that are doing it at the state level, that eliminates the need for a local jurisdiction to do it. And
That's right.
Maryland does not have a state program.
That's right.
So what differentiates here is Montgomery County's taken the lead to do something that's being done in other states because the state of Maryland is not doing it.
Right.
So
That was related to so the follow-up question there is, if we hope that Delegate Chi's efforts, as were noted earlier, are successful, will that eliminate the need for this program from the county? Is the county filling in what the state has failed to do? And if the state steps up to do it, the county will no longer have to do it? Or do you think it will still be necessary for both to exist?
I think it's a branding and a packaging and image position. If Montgomery County can differentiate itself amongst all the other counties that we compete with in the United States, especially in those top 10 states where you'd have Cambridge and Research Triangle and San Francisco, San Diego, and all those things aren't offered locally. And as a matter of fact, a lot of those don't even have SBIR assistance programs where they offer proposal assistance just because there's so much venture capital money there. And having those proposal assistance programs, I think, is also critical for the county. And I'll say that last thing I'll say just on the series of programs. I think that if you really want to work with underserved companies, you're going to have to do a carve out. You need to have a special program that will differentiate their requirements, because a lot of them don't have the exposure, the experience, and never have gone for a federal grant before. And it's a very intimidating process to write a proposal for an SBIR program. It's not simple to do the first time. And generally the first time winners nationally on SBIRs only win 21% of the time. So even if you do apply, there's 1 out of 5 chances you're going to win. And generally the first time, there's less times that you're going to win the first time you submit a proposal. As you get more experienced and do resubmissions or you'll have a greater chance. And, our program focuses on one term first, and that's what companies have commercially relevant technology in the biohealth field that has the potential to get in the marketplace. And if it can do that and get commercialized, then it has the chance of creating great economic benefits to the county, the state, or wherever. And that commercially relevant is different than a phase 0 program, which would be a first-time proposal, for example, to learn about SBIR federal granting process, getting educated on what you have to do to get into the game, and then more importantly, what you have to do to be competitive in the game once you're in it. So there is no one way that one SBIR assistance program from Montgomery County is going to be able to equitably service everybody within the county, and there will have to be some differentiation, I think, for the program as it's redesigned to help address what the priority areas for the county are.
No, I appreciate that. So the thing that is interesting to me, first of all, I think that our focus in terms of disadvantaged businesses should be focusing on helping them actually get the federal awards. The $25,000 or $75,000 is really barely a drop in the bucket here. The issue is earlier than that on even being able to get it. This is something that is based on already having gone through a rigorous process that you need access to capital, to information, to resources, to connections, things that, by definition, a disadvantaged business doesn't have to start with, or at least is starting at a disadvantage. And so I think if that is our goal, which I think it ought to be, or at least a huge part of our goal, then we need to think differently rather than just trying to, recreate this program to serve something. I think we got to get in ahead of it and really think through before they even get to this match. why aren't certain businesses eligible? We know, as Councilmember Jawando was mentioning, we know the talent is here. We probably have more of that talent than any other place on earth. And the question is, are we helping to maximize, that talent on the front end? And I do think there's a lot of work that we ought to do. And I think we can think a little bit bigger than just this particular grant program about that issue, because I don't want to get pigeonholed into, waiting until they've already gotten federal money to figure out how we can get $25,000 to a business. Because frankly, that is way past when, the greatest level of support in terms of creating that level of equity is needed, at least from my perspective. Do we have data, any data that shows that the companies that receive the county match are more successful in receiving additional federal money or an additional private money? I mean, presumably this is a small amount of money. $25,000 for these businesses is very little. 75,000 even once you get to the next phase is pretty small. And the number of businesses we're talking about is not very high either. I mean, 9 businesses in FY19 and 7 businesses in FY20. So, I mean, do we have anything that shows? Maybe Lori, are you chiming in?
Well, I don't have hard data to share with you, but I can tell you that I do know that some of the companies that have been awarded phase 1 matching grants from us in earlier years have applied for matching phase 2 grants. So that is, success from those companies, that they've moved from the phase 1 award at the federal level to a phase 2 award, and that they're changing how they're applying for their local matching grant. But I would defer to Rich, who probably, BHI is the one who does most of that counseling with those local companies. But just anecdotally from some of the applicants that we've seen through the program, is I have seen them go from phase 1 applicants to phase 2 applicants.
Yeah, I think it's a good point you're making there, Councilman. Basically, a number of the companies we work with, and we don't work with every company that is basically applying for the matching Montgomery program, but the ones that we have worked with successfully have been able to achieve some level of angel capital, venture capital, and have had sometimes multiple successes at the federal program level. Some of them have already taken advantage of the Maryland Biotechnology Tax Credit Program. In addition, they take advantage of the Montgomery County program. They're generally well-educated. They understand all of the programs available and have learned how to take advantage of the programs that are available. And also, generally, that makes them a little better business people. So the Biotechnology Tax Credit Program in Maryland, by the way, is a 50% tax credit. But if you live in one of the outlying underserved counties in the state of Maryland, you can get a 75% tax credit. So there's some precedence in the state program to differentiate, helping recognize companies in those underserved communities that they can get a little better match if they're successful in applying for an investor tax credit program than somebody in Baltimore, Prince George's, Montgomery County, or Frederick County. So, I mean, there are some other state programs maybe we could take a look at to see what they're doing to work for disadvantaged districts or other elements where there are additional incentives.
Yeah, a lot of times the state and those programs look at lack adequate access to private capital, and there are a lot of standards that can be demonstrated. Geography is, has been used as one of them, along with all the other traditional ones. Lori?
So this is going to be kind of off that topic a little bit. I just want to talk a little bit about the first come, first served, which is actually in county code. That's how county council originally set it up, was as first come, first served. I don't want anybody to think that executive staff decided that that's how we were going to do it.
Thanks for reminding us, Lori, that we
sure.
change our mind sometimes.
But I do think part of the reason for that is because the federal agencies make SBIR, STTR awards throughout the year at different times throughout the year. So, if we're going to talk about, granting the local match awards based on the if we think something's more able to be commercialized than something else, does that mean, I mean, because currently our application is always open. You can apply at any time if you've received a federal SBIR award online at our online application. If there are funds remaining and you qualify, then you can get an award. If the funds have already been expended, like our phase 2 awards go very quickly, then we tell you that if you qualify, you can reapply next year when, or if a supplemental award is provided, you can apply when additional funds are available. But if we're going to say that we're going to evaluate the applications now on the merit of what it is that their work, the research they're doing, et cetera, and the application period is always open, I could get a very great application on June 1st, so at the very end of a fiscal year, but there still wouldn't be any guarantee that there would be funds remaining because we've evaluated things as they've come in and had very meritorious applications that were submitted earlier in the year. So it becomes a very difficult, we're not just doing it first come, first served, now we're also going to add these other elements. So I'm just throwing that out from an administrative perspective.
Yeah.
That it does make it a little tougher for, how long are we going to wait until we evaluate everything, or are we actually going to establish an open and close application period and then evaluate everything from a certain period to make those awards? So
well, it raises the question of if you don't make it an automatic, you check this box, you check this box, you check this box, and you get certain money. Maybe there's a bonus or something if you hit certain additional, criteria. I think that's what we have to all think through. But certainly if we change it from that, kind of binary evaluation process, it does change the nature of it. And I think we have to think through that. I do think so. This is my last question on this, and I'm not suggesting and I'm trying to criticize. I'm just trying to get a handle on it. One, I do think in some form or fashion, we should try to get a better handle on whether or not the businesses that receive these county grants, which is a small proportion of those that receive federal grants, are more successful in receiving additional private and additional federal money. I think if we can't get that information, it's hard to justify the program beyond a marketing strategy. And I'm not saying that that's a bad idea to have a marketing strategy to double down on our leadership in bio, but I do think that it's hard to argue it beyond that. So I'll just say that. And then the last piece is, and maybe this is a question for Rich, but I'd open it to anybody. Fiscal year 19, there's 139 companies in Montgomery County that got federal grants. 9 got the county match. In 20, 173 received federal grants. 7 got the county match. So it's not as if companies are not applying for federal, fund. I mean, based on the county match, it's just unclear what role the county is actually playing, unless the county is helping to accelerate their ability to get additional funds. I mean, do we think that there are fewer businesses that are applying for federal grants in the county because they're not getting county match dollars, or do we think it doesn't have much of an impact on whether or not they apply for federal grants or not?
Just my own opinion, I don't think the Montgomery County matching grant program is the only incentive that would make someone want to apply for a federal grant. So I think it's an added benefit that they have that available. And I see Phil shaking his head too. I don't think that the program by itself is enough incentive, because if they can get $500,000 on a phase 1, and they, from a federal agency, and you get 25 from the county, they're really incentivized to be going after that federal money. And I had another thought, and since I'm getting old, I just forgot it. But it was relevant to this topic we were talking about right now, which is very important. We were talking about what kind of help do companies need. NIH has created a program, the PHED program, and they've hired a consultant, if a company wins a phase one, that means that they might have good science and technology, but they might not have great business acumen. They may not have experience in going after raising money. They might not know how to do the regulatory strategy or pathway to go through the FDA process. And what NIH is doing with their money is providing a consultant to them to provide X number of hours of consulting service to the company to assist them with business issues, not just science issues. So if we're looking at a disadvantaged program, where could we help the most? And that's really, I think, trying to provide additional resources, knowledge, and networks to those companies which they don't have access to as they're going through the application process, or if they win a first-time grant and they've never won before, but they also have additional business needs in that company that they can't afford, even if they want a grant. Maybe the county could provide some type of a consulting service to them to help them develop a better business and commercialization strategy, which would help them become a better biohealth or life science company and be more competitive. So I know that they recognize that at the national level, and if they know that at the national level, I'm sure it exists at the local level as well.
So I gotta say, I'll close on this. I think that is a big thing here. And I think if we have a takeaway from this program, if we're gonna expand it and add a lot of money into it, I'd love to see us adding adding funds that have broader reach and can actually help provide the support that it seems to me is most needed. And I think, whether it's a consultant or something along that way, it's capacity building and connecting for these businesses. To me, I think that is what we're missing, and I'd love to see us really double down and focus on that. And I think there we would have the easiest, best, and most effective opportunity to expand opportunities to those businesses that don't have as many opportunities, to make sure that we have a better proportion that's more reflective of the county itself and of our talent pipeline, so that they're getting access to the broader capital. Because ultimately, the county is never going to be able to keep up with state programs, and it's never going to be able to keep up with what the feds are doing. The key to us is to be able to unlock the box and allow folks to be able to find the money that's out there that they're not accessing right now. So I really think that ought to be a key follow-up focus for us as moving forward. And I think the equity conversation, that could really be an area where those resources are focused and deployed, particularly to those entrepreneurs who, lack those resources to begin with before they have the chance to get these county funds. Thanks.
All right, so I'm going to turn it back to Gene, and he'll sum up here, but I think we want to get a set of recommendations, options. It doesn't have to be, you can give us options as well as what you recommend, and then where you think you just put it forward for additional consideration. I think given MCEDC's work on the strategic plan generally this fall, I'd like to ask BHI to be the lead and work with MCEDC, in a collaborative effort, and come back to us. I don't know if mid-September is possible, but come back to us with a set of options and recommendations. Gene?
That sounds good. What I'm taking from this is that council staff will work with obviously the executive branch and then our partners at MCDC and BHI to present to the committee some recommendations. It sounds like for more, not just for changes to this particular program, but a suite of options, as Mr. Friedman said, options also to look at broader outreach and reach beyond just this program, but how does this program fit into the more global strategy for the county to advance our biotech community? My understanding, at least for this specific program, and I'll quickly check with Ms. Boyer, I believe given how the funds work, some of them have already probably been expended, or at least are locked for this year, given how quickly phase 2 businesses can apply and use up some of their preparations. So we have time, the committee has time to consider things in the fall. So we'll look at mid-September or October, but I'll work with them offline to see the best timing and share that with the committee.
Okay, you'll work on the timing. All right. Thank you. All right, we can move to the next item, which is the biotech investment credit.
Sure. And this one will probably be a little quicker, not only given our time, but given its operation. So
let me ask everyone to mute, please, if you're not, you're not speaking. Okay, great.
Thank you. So the county also has under the Economic Development Fund, the Bio Investor Incentive Tax Credit Supplement, a very long moniker. It was created in fiscal 12 as a companion program to the state's tax credit program. And council staff just wants to reiterate and emphasize that the county's program is not a tax credit program. It is a supplement. It is cash grant to investors that receive the tax credits from the state for investing in a qualified biotechnology business that's headquartered in the county. So simply put, if I'll just use myself as an example, although I've never made an investment in a biotech firm here, if I make an investment into a biotech business, a qualified investment based on the state's program into a biotech business in the county that's headquartered here, I make a $500,000 investment, I can receive a $250,000 tax credit from the state. If I have no tax liability in the state, I can receive that as a refund, and it gives me a 50% return on my investment almost immediately with my investment into a biotech business. The county's supplement benefits investors who do that through the state program for a little bit additional. 5 to 8% is what the program shows over its history for the last 10 years. And so the county created this program to continue to add an added benefit to investments in the biotech community here in the county. It's similar to the last program we just talked about. It's an entitlement program. It's formulaic as described in the county code. Administration is not simple, I should say, but it's simple in the sense that we only need the state report to show us which investors received qualified tax or got a tax credit certificate for qualified investments previous calendar year. As noted in the report, that we're relying on the state for that annual report, and it's been coming a little later recently, maybe partly due to the pandemic, maybe just partly due to the timing for them to produce their reports, and so the county cannot disperse this until we receive the report. And then finance staff work to contact all the investors that made qualified investments that year and got tax credits and follow up to make sure they get their grant. Historically, as you can see, sorry, I'm on the wrong page on my memo. On page 11 in table 5, historically we've been giving about 60 grants a year, although that number has decreased in the last 3 years. It's less than 30 grants a year. But because of the way the appropriation or the legal authority exists for the appropriation, we expend all $500,000 that the council appropriates every year because an investor receives a proportion of what they received in qualified tax credits. So again, if I had 5% of the tax credits that went to county businesses from the state, I get 5% of the county's appropriation as part of my grant. And it's also similar to the last program council staff has provided. We're able to the kind of share of the state's tax credit program, and so on average, about 40% of the investors to 50% of the investors are that receive the tax credit through the state are making investments in county businesses. And again, about 40 to 50% of those tax credits from the state are for investors making investments in county businesses. Although that number significantly decreased in calendar year 2020, where only 26.5% of the investors of the state program were for county businesses, but we still received a rather large share of the state tax credits. There are no jurisdictions that have a county supplement like this that staff could identify or executive staff could identify. So there's the very limited window in terms of how this program compares to others. Most importantly, I mean, as we went through the review for the program, I mean, similar to the last program, because this is an entitled program, it's hard to say whether it's inducing additional economic activity, whether it's and where the biotech businesses that receive these investments are going based on the current reporting rubric we have. Most importantly, the Department of Legislative Services a few years ago stated that they did not believe that the state tax credit program, which provides 50% return on investment for those qualified investments, is doing anything to encourage additional investments in the state. The General Assembly has received that information, has continued the program. They've tailored it a little differently based on some recommendations from the DLS report. But again, it's important to note that it's not, there was limited data for the state to determine if their sizable program is moving the needle in terms of making investments into the programs here. So I guess to continue to move us along, council staff likes to talk about program inertia. And so the program will continue to run as long as the council provides appropriation for it, or as long as the state continues to have a companion program. There is no sunset date for this program, and so the state's program is expected to sunset in 2025 unless the General Assembly continues it. And so if the council continues to provide a $500,000 appropriation for this program, council staff believes we can expect a similar level of activity in terms of expending the $500,000 to 30 to 60 investors a year based on their investments in qualified biotech businesses headquartered in the county. And so council staff did provide a few options for further discussion, depending on how the committee wants to handle it now, knowing that we're getting later on in time. But similar to the SBIR program, council staff believes there needs to be more conversation about how do we report and understand what's happening with these biotech businesses that are receiving investments. There's limited data. We have anecdotal data. They're still in good standing with the state of Maryland. Maybe there's some specific business engagement data we can have for either from PHI or MCDC. But in terms of the actual report we get each year, the council receives from the executive on this program, there's limited data to know, like, do these investments from the investors spur these biotech businesses on to either growth or additional commercialization, or is it just an additional grant provided to each investor? So I'll pause there. I have other discussion topics if we want to go there, but we'll start there. So based on where we're at, and I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Bremer.
All right. I mean, I suppose if you're a biotech entrepreneur, you're trying to raise money, you can tell potential investors, you know, this program here can improve your rate of return, essentially. And your ability to make that pitch probably depends on how certain you are that that funding will actually be available. And I guess, you know, we could talk a bit more about that. But let's turn to our partners here. I mean, I think there's a fair question as to whether this funding is getting the most impact. You know, should we consider allocating this to biotech in a different way? Or is your experience that, you know, this is helping create wins? You know, let's hear from our economic development partners here. So, Ben.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I think you're raising some very good questions about the program. The Bioinvestor Tax Credit is probably the signature program to support life sciences in the state, and it's continually been ratified as such by the Life Science Advisory Board. And so it's, even though there is facing a sunset, you know, I think that there's a good probability that it will continue. This is actually a program that Judy and I have a lot of personal engagement in from our past roles over at Commerce. And I'll let Judy talk a little bit about the program from her perspective as well. One of the things to be aware of is that the precursor for the county support is the fact that a company receives the state tax credit. And it's a very popular program. And in order to be eligible, the General Assembly has created a first come, first serve process in order to be objective and to have everybody be open to potential application. Just because there's a limited amount of money, it's $12 million, and it's been a very popular program. But what we've seen over the course of the past several years of administration of the program is that it's so popular that once we moved the program to an electronic format, it was oversubscribed within 28 seconds. And so basically what we're rewarding are those who are the fastest to be able to get the tax credit. And so it's a battle of electrons, to speak. And then the county support is only given to those that have the fastest connections, or the fact that they're fortunate enough to have been able to get in so quickly. So we're not necessarily rewarding those companies that have the best outcomes for success. Also, you know, DLS did a study, and the program has now hit, I think it's its 13th year or so. but the state has expended over $100 million to the program. And it has been very helpful to those companies that have received the tax credit and allows them to continue to stay, get capitalization. And also it's much more incentivized for a company to seek external support through this tax credit. And so those that have received the tax credit have benefited. But when DLS looked at it in terms of job creation, job creation numbers were not as strong as we would have liked. But to complement Friedland's point regarding data and metrics.
Can you lean maybe a little closer? We're starting to lose you a little bit.
Sure. So to Councilman Friedland's point about data and metrics, what we've seen from the bioinvestor tax credit review by DLS is that those recipients have actually not expanded as much as we would have liked, to the point where I can't recall the exact number, Judy, but I think it was somewhere about, we were subsidizing per new job created over the $100 million plus. It's almost like $100,000 a job. It wasn't that significant. And so as the county looks to try to maximize its output and make sure that we have as much impact as possible for our program, those are things to consider.
And I don't have a lot to add, as you were there a little bit longer than I, but because of the issues you raised, the percentage of the credit to the number of investors was lowered. I understand they put in some criteria to help limit the same people winning the credits year after year, which has been a concern and may become one for, you touched on it in the earlier discussion about SBIR and STTRs, but the dollar per job creation for early stage biotechs is always challenging because you can spend so many millions of dollars on the research before you're able to become a Novavax and hire 400 people. I will say that from a marketing standpoint, and Ben referenced it, we've all proactively, the state's tax credit and the county's tax credit is something that we all mention to anyone seeking to raise investment capital as a positive. And I'm not sure that the question comes up when you're defending it, but would the investors have invested without the credit? That's what you really want to know. Is there a better alternative use? And there are some who say they won't, but if they believe in the technology, there are many who say they would. And it's not that necessarily that they're looking at a better return, Chair, as you referenced, but it's that you're de-risking that investment in a very risky technology. And it's a kind of a nuance, but it's a different way that they approach it.
But what's the certainty that an investor can get it? I mean, the impact, I think, is directly related to the certainty, right? If you have no idea whether you're going to be able to get it, or do some of them hold their investment until they get a decision about the tax credit?
Yeah, in certain instances, they will withhold their investment until they are eligible.
But and representing, so if I were to invest, to use Jean's earlier example, if I were to invest in Jean's company and I believed in it, I'm going to make that investment no matter what. If I get the credit, if I invest $100,000, I get a $33,000 tax credit. I could either put that much additional capital into his company or de-risk, know that I spent less. When we were advising companies representing the state or the county, we would say that's the tax credit is not the determining factor. It should be that you believe in the company and this is de-risking, if that makes sense. It's definitely an incentive because we've had companies that look between Baltimore and here who recognize the county's add-on as substantial, and we have companies that look between Maryland and elsewhere who recognize that Maryland has, one of the most progressive tax credit programs.
So to follow on to Judy's point, from a marketing perspective, it's wonderful. It continues to brand Montgomery County as a leader and an innovator for life sciences companies to come to. The question I think that's being raised today is the practical impact of it beyond the marketing tool. And also just by virtue of the fact that this is a follow-up, the precursor is the state program and how until the criteria is changed there, it really becomes a first come, first serve. And right now, within 28 seconds, we'll be oversubscribed. And so there's no filter there to determine what the output is for companies that are the most successful to have received either the state or the county support.
Okay. I see Pete has his hand up.
Chairman.
Oh, Brad. Yeah.
So,
Go ahead, Brad.
so, Mr. Chairman, if I can add, so ironically, this is, I'll explicitly state what I said before. This is the program, the state's program is what I was talking about, where you have people who are unwilling to pick winners and losers. It's the least risky approach is just to make it a lottery system. And as a result, I'm not sure that anyone comes out better as a result of that. And to answer the question I suspect Councilmember Friedson will ask as a follow-up to the exact same one he asked in the previous program, I think there is a tremendous opportunity to, the outcome of this should be the same as the outcome from the previous discussion. There's an opportunity to think, is there a better way to deploy this money in a way which ensures that the businesses who receive this funding, whether it's through this same mechanism as a biotech investor tax credit or some other mechanism, could that funding be put to ensure we support those businesses who are have the greatest potential to contribute to the economy here in Montgomery County?
Right. That's the question I was posing as well. Rich and Pete.
I think Pete was first.
Pete and Rich.
I was just simply going to add to what Ben had said in terms of how the state processes, and that it really is sort of a race to see who can apply initially. We receive our list from the state. So obviously the information that we are receiving are going to be those companies that have applied as quickly as they possibly could. The other thing I'd like to add is that, as Jean had said before, the number of investors has decreased over the course of the program. But what's also interesting to know, or important to know, is that we're really dealing with a handful of companies that these investors are really investing in. So each year, as I'm getting these reports, we're probably talking about 5 to 6 companies, no more than that.
The other thing I'd add is, while the process is flawed, and it's definitely flawed, pushing a button and whoever has the fastest computer. I think I use it, and a lot of people use it as a marketing tool to sell Maryland and Montgomery County and our region. And to be honest with you, when you put that, you package that together with Montgomery County's tax credit program, the matching SBIR program, TEDCO, the stem cell program, your MOVE program, and other programs, I don't think any economic development program can stand on its own. But when you look at putting a package together, which I think is something that differentiates the way that Montgomery County's economic development programs have grown over time, I think that, the county should be proud of the way that they have designed their programs, even though there's some flaw to them. But it is a hell of a lot easier to market Montgomery County and the state of Maryland based on the comprehensiveness of the programs that are available. And the people that are sold the biotechnology tax product program as an potential incentive are not guaranteed that they will be able to take advantage of it, but they say they can be eligible to take advantage of it, just like it would be in Montgomery County. I know companies specifically, though, when they look at the full package of programs in Maryland and in Montgomery County, they've made their final location decision based on the comprehensiveness of the economic development programs, not being guaranteed that they'd be a participant in them, but at least they're available within the state, within the county. So for the amount of money that's available on this program towards the overall budget, I still think it's nice to say we are the only county in the United States that has a biotechnology investor program. And it is complementary to the strategy of trying to be a top 3 biohealth cluster by 2023.
Okay.
And I'll echo.
Right.
Sorry, Councilmember Ritter. So I'll echo something very important that Rich said there. Conceptually, this is incredibly valuable. I mean, when we look at some of the fundamental challenges we have here in Montgomery County and Maryland, it's attracting venture capital. Some of that may be due for other reasons, and maybe the readiness that the companies we have here have. Fundamentally, it's a very good idea. As he said, the problem is the system is flawed. And so I think if you keep those 2 very important things in mind, that may be helpful as this gets thought through going forward. It's an exceptional idea. It's a terrible system.
Well, all right, this is a tricky one. I think my thinking about it would be we ought to consider whether there is a tool that we could fund that would also really strengthen your pitch, to the sector that might get more bang for the buck. But, under no circumstances would we want to diminish the effort or resources that we're applying here, so it's simply a question of, would you want to lean on the state's tax credit and have something else to talk about? Or do you feel like this is really important? Or do you think there's some kind of system you can create that is an enhancement to this to make it more useful? It's challenging questions we won't answer today, but you can think about them. Gene?
In regard with that, I was going to say that we can include this in the broader conversation as we work with BHI and MCDC on the previous program and look at this as a suite of programs aimed at advancing our biotechnology community industry in this county. And again, the funding is always it's a difficult question to answer when it comes to the budget, but it's an easy question to answer in terms of how do we look at all the funding that's available and how best to position it. And so we can continue the conversation as you want, Mr. Reamer. I was just going to suggest I can include this as we work together on the other program.
Great. Yeah, I think that would be good. Mitch?
Yeah, one last thing is just as MCEDC is doing the analysis on SBIR throughout the other states, even though there's no other counties or local jurisdictions, there are, I think, about 20 other states that have matching programs like this. And I think it would not hurt to do the analysis of those other states, just like we're doing with SBIR, because we might learn some insights on how they've tweaked their program to improve it over time, because these have been around in some of the states for 10 to 15 years or more. So it'd be nice to see how some of them have progressed with their matching programs, investor matching programs. A number of them are angel capital matching programs, not just biohealth. They would be for angel matches rather than by industry sector. Ours is generally more investor by industry, which is the biohealth. But I think it would be an interesting analysis if they could do it to see what the other states are doing.
Yeah, I mean, if there's ways to narrow the scope, you can retain the marketing value while increasing the impact potentially. Judy?
Just thinking about our conversation here, I think it is true that the majority of an investor makes a decision primarily based on the Maryland tax credit. And learning from Pete that $500,000 is only going to 5 or 6 companies, one might think about, I'm totally brainstorming as we've been asked to do, having that, using $250,000 in a traditional manner or however it's determined, using the other $250,000 maybe towards historically underrepresented companies or another program. You still have the marketing value and perhaps a better way to leverage funds. And then I wanted to add one other thing on the prior conversation with SBIR, STTR, a lot of good research was shared. I don't know how many people, and I know a lot of local companies are not aware of the fact that there are minority and diversity supplements to SBIR, STTRs, and every institute has recently created its own technical assistance program to help historically underrepresented companies. So I just wanted to suggest that when MCDC and BHI are doing their research, that maybe you pull in existing technical assistance programs geared towards historically underrepresented populations, as well as the diversity supplements, which the federal agencies told me they had but they couldn't get the money out the door fast enough. Those are some federal dollars that could be available to local companies, and a best use of our funds might be not replicating those services, but helping make sure companies know how to access them. And that's
Excellent points, Judy. Thank you. I was thinking along those lines that maybe you could split it, you retain the marketing value, but you can target in a way that has a more certain impact in a way you're trying to have an impact. So that sounds like terrific research. Rich, did you want to add? Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, can I talk about a program that's not on the docket today, but I think one that could be very important?
Sure.
I think one of the greatest opportunities Montgomery County has is for international soft landing of companies to come to Montgomery County. And I think that we work with them every day, and we're trying to onboard an Italian and a UK company right now to come into Montgomery County. One of the greatest challenges they have, and if they're early stage, is that, you know, we have to help them set up a U.S. subsidiary, get articles, bylaws, look at their intellectual property, make sure it's okay, and do a little background research on them. And to be honest with you, as an incentive, if we could come up with a little international soft landing startup package for them to land in Montgomery County, I think that would go a long way if we could use that money basically to retain an attorney to get them onboarded, create their U.S. subsidiary. And one of the things that we do, which a lot of people may not be aware of, we help them create a U.S. subsidiary that's 51% controlled by Americans. And in doing that, they're able to go after federal programs, state programs, county programs, whereas if they came in as a 100% owned and controlled international company in Montgomery County, they're not eligible for any local programs. The other thing that does is incentivize other investors who might be local to get involved when these companies land at an earlier stage. It incentivizes us to work with them because we can become a partner with them. But if you had something like a $50,000 package to stimulate an international company to help them land in Montgomery County, I'm not aware of many places in the country that offer that right now. And I think that's one of the greatest opportunities we have with the FDA, the NIH. We got 40% of the warp speed money that came into Montgomery County, setting up a global pandemic center here. I mean, we're getting a lot of international and national attention on the county right now. So we should take advantage and piggyback on trying to get more people to locate here. And I think internationally, especially in Europe, we're a nice alternative. Boston's extremely expensive. New York's expensive right now. The cost of wet lab space is twice as much in Boston and New York City as it is in Montgomery County. Just trying to get jobs and housing in those markets is unbelievable. So we are an unbelievable location for people as an alternative to land on the East Coast right now. We have 3 airports. We got the highest qualified workforce that there is. You have your regulatory agency. You got the biggest basic research agency in the world sitting in our backyard in Bethesda with NIH. I just think that's a tremendous opportunity for us.
Awesome. If you could please make sure you add that into the memos that'll come back. I'd love to develop that and see if we want to move that forward.
Great. We'll put a little memo together.
That'd be great. Thank you for that. All right. So I think that may conclude. I think now Andrew, additional comments?
I don't want to reiterate everything that I said before. I think the same is true. We've already kind of hit on that. And so I just appreciate the fact that we're doing the deep dive into these. I think this is a really positive start. I think all of these programs are really positive. We have the opportunity to make them better. We have the opportunity to make them more inclusive and better reflective of both who the community is and what the community and the county is looking for. And I think today's discussion and conversation is a positive step in that direction. So I'm looking forward to smarter people than me who understand this stuff a lot better than I do, thinking through some of these issues and coming back with some recommendations, but just wanted to offer my appreciation. I'd been asking for these types of deep dives. I know we're going to continue to do it more, but I think this was a really productive and positive start to this effort. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I just ditto to that and looking forward to the follow-up. And I think we unearthed some things here. And just Ms. Blake, just a reminder, that great data you quoted, just please send that over. That'd be great. Thank you.
Terrific. So long overdue, and great conversation here. A lot of opportunities to make some improvements. Clearly, middle of September is too soon, so we'll aim for the end of September, and we'll be back to continue building on this conversation and make some changes and build some better programs. All right, that concludes our discussion this morning. Thank you so much for everyone's participation, and the FED committee will be back at 1:30, but we will see you next time. All right, thanks, care, everybody. Thanks.
They've been a team now for about 6 months. At one